We're down to the third bit of this chapter 4, information security program development. So let's talk, let me talk about the overall structure of the course in the timeline first. Let me find the right browser. All right, so here, here, okay. So we are here in the course. Let me get down here, okay. So this is 4C. Next week, we're going to have 4D. After that, we have a guest speaker. Kaz, who is a professional pen tester student of mine, going to talk about Kubernetes for hackers, which I think is very good. And on the day before this, on Tuesday night, Caitlin's going to talk about radio frequency for hackers. I highly recommend both of those. They're worth extra credit. And then the last class. So we're almost at the end of the class. There's a lecture today and a lecture next week, and that's it. We're not going to cover any more of the book. There'll just be a guest lecture, and the last class I'll introduce no new materials. So I'll just be here to answer questions for anybody who wants help, needs to catch up on things and such. So this happens always because of Thanksgiving and Christmas. These fall semesters, midterms is really like 2/3 of the way through instead of halfway through. Anyway, so let's take a look at this stuff. We're going to talk about policy development and mostly third-party risk management and a lot of details about how you control the risk from using third-party, which is extremely important now that everybody is putting everything in the cloud. Almost nobody is independent anymore. They're using all these cloud services, from GitHub to Gmail to Office 365, Amazon, everywhere. So a bunch of your data is being handled by other people, and you have to consider the risks of that. So there's more sections we'll cover in a later chapter as far as we get. So to develop your policy, this is the foundational document that designs your principles and required actions, and the audience is all personnel, but it's usually in a sort of general terms. All your workers, including contractors and consultants, should be covered by your security policy. Nobody should be allowed to claim ignorance, and they often have to have annual training where they learn the policy and so on at the time of hire and annually thereafter to make sure everybody knows your security policy. And so your considerations, you have laws and regulations and standards for your industry. You have the risk tolerance for your industry, depending on how much risk you want to take, which varies on your industry. Then controls and culture. These are things that go into your security policy. So to align with controls, you have to make sure that your policies and controls do not contradict each other. As I mentioned many times, clumsy security professionals barge into a company and pass unreasonable rules, like everybody has to have a 10-character password and change it every 90 days, or everybody must have two-factor authentication of some difficult type that is hard to implement, that fouls up people's workflow, so it either impairs the company's business or people evade the policy because it's too difficult. And you have to be careful that your security policy is actually helping achieve the goal and not just messing up the flow of work in the company. And that's, the policy must be understood, and it must, and often you'll have to have exceptions. Like, typically you'll have very restricted machines where people do not have administrator rights and they can only run like the 10 official applications for most workers, but your technical workers do need administrator rights and they do need to be able to install other tools and things like that. So you have sort your groups and workers into categories and give them different restrictions. So you'll have acceptable use of the assets and mobile devices, protection of information. This is the big one that constantly gets attention: access control, passwords, two-factor authentication. Everybody is always focusing on this because people keep getting hacked by password compromises, and everybody is under great pressure now to move up to two-factor. And of course, your personally owned device policy is important. I'm getting yet more laptops from my corporate customers, but I keep telling them I'd much rather just have a cloud machine so I can use my personal device, but it goes on. And people have to know what to do about security incidents, and they have to have they have to understand what the rules are about using communications. And social media, again, they have to know what the rules are. Remember back when I was on Twitter, this was a business application. You're only one tweet away from getting fired. Now Twitter's gone, so that makes all our lives safer, except for the people still on Twitter. And then you've got workplace safety, visitors who may wander around and see things. You probably have to make them sign a non-disclosure agreement, and the consequences of failure to comply with the security policy. And as I mentioned, cloud computing and all the other third-party risks are things you have to consider, and that gets tricky. You have to trust somebody else and have some idea what they're actually doing with your stuff. So your policy should be accessible. Your high-ranking executives should inform the workers and lead by example. It is very common that executives break the policy. This is what happened. This is how Boris Johnson lost being Prime Minister of Britain. He passed a draconian COVID lockdown policy so even the Queen couldn't go to the funeral of her husband, and then he just threw parties and walked around and totally ignored it himself, and they threw him out on that grounds, or even, I think, tried to imprison some of his other high government officials because they were so angry that he failed to obey his own policies. Also, our mayor, London Breed, did the same thing, passed a draconian lockdown policy and then went partying, breaking it herself, feeling like it didn't apply to her.
I can't vote.
Well, you know, it's a very, Elon Musk is the same. These powerful people just think they are the master race and the rules don't apply to them. Trump is totally the same. Trump doesn't even think he has to pay his bills. Elon Musk doesn't even think he has to pay the severance pay or his lawsuits or for his server charges or for the rent. He's refusing to pay all of that. At Twitter, he just thinks he shouldn't have to. He's the king of the earth. Everybody should just give him stuff.
My friend said that if you were to buy the Cybertruck, they're saying that in the clause you can't sell it, and if you do, they'll sue you for $50K.
Wow.
I'm like,
That's pretty harsh. You can't sell the truck. Yeah.
For 1 year.
for 1 year.
1 year. Well, that's interesting. Well, I mean, in principle, they can put anything in there, but that's a mighty weird thing to do. I don't think it's illegal to put it in, but that's a mighty screwy thing to do. Probably means he thinks of it as a proprietary secret. You know, if you have like a phone,
He doesn't want people to resell the thing for profit.
he doesn't want to take it apart and see how it works, right? Yeah.
No, doesn't want people to resell for profit.
Sell it for profit. Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. Why not?
What?
Why not? I mean, if the price goes up and people sell it for a higher price, he'd make more
He
money.
doesn't want somebody, you know.
People will scalp them.
They're gonna price and other people come pay.
Well, you're right. People could scalp them. They could buy 10 of them and then sell. All right. Maybe it even makes sense there. But anyway, all right. So third-party risk management is the big topic here. So you're going to outsource stuff to cloud services. But if you outsource something, remember, you can outsource work, but you cannot outsource responsibility. If they get breached and lose that data, you can't say, it's not my fault. It is your fault if you handed the data to some idiot who doesn't handle it properly and loses it. Well, why did you give it to that idiot? Why didn't you audit them? Why didn't you check before you hired them? You know, if they lose it, you're still liable for losing your data.
The law is like the company responsible right now, right?
What's that?
The law is like
Yes.
company responsible for
Yes.
the data.
Yeah, the company that gathered the data from the end users is responsible for it, and whether they lose it themselves or they give it to somebody else who loses it, in both cases, they're responsible for having exposed that data, and there will be legal consequences. Yeah. So, however, everybody is doing it because it turns out to be extremely valuable. The putting your stuff on the Amazon cloud is much better than trying to buy your own hardware and make your own server. It's faster and easier. They have the newest version of everything. The economies of scale are better. Just almost everybody finds that it is very beneficial to your business to use third parties. And this is why even in Europe, for the last 10 years, there's been a huge problem because Europe has strong privacy laws, and Europeans that use American services have no privacy at all. The government can just totally snoop on it. Americans have precious little privacy protection, and foreigners in America have none at all. So it is blatantly illegal for European companies to use American services. And there was a thing called Safe Harbor, and then when the Snowden revelation came out, they came up with something else. They keep inventing these laws where American companies sort of promise they'll try to protect the European data, which they can't. And then Europeans continue to use services because the business advantage of using all these cheap and free American services is so valuable that the companies there do it, even though it arguably is illegal for their data to come over here. They keep coming up with special exceptions to the law in a temporary basis to let them keep using American companies because various people have tried to make European equivalents of like Google and Amazon, and they have not been able to do it. So anyway, that's the point. You save so much money and get better service by using third parties. Newsom and the Laundry Room, yep. Yeah, it was the French Laundry. The French Laundry was the restaurant he went to when he was supposed to be on COVID lockdown. And London Breed went to some kind of disco dance when he was supposed to be on COVID lockdown, you know, and they both said, what? I'm special. I can just do this, right? And they were sort of horrified when people said no. Anyway, so All right, so if you use third parties, it might cost more than you think. That's an issue. You might get poor quality performance. And the main thing, of course, is loss of control. And now you don't really know about their employees. Maybe they're not screening their employees, giving them background checks and all that jazz. And you may perhaps lose a competitive advantage. Everybody else can do the same thing. So you're going to kind of be conforming to like a vanilla thing instead of maybe if you did it yourself, you could have some revolutionary new improvement. But most companies are the opposite. They don't really have good technical skills on the staff. That's why they would rather outsource the server maintenance and stuff to somebody like Amazon that specializes in that. They might make mistakes. The vendor might fail. They might have different goals than you do. And if you have a problem, it might be hard to get a response from them that helps you. One thing that's common is you can't really get at the logs to find out what happened because the logs are shared by many users and so on. And your employees, of course, may quit the company and quit trying as they realize my job is just going to get outsourced, so there's no future for me here. That's a very common problem in this Silicon Valley culture of mass layoffs. If you have compliance regulations, you have to make sure that your third-party vendors are in compliance with the laws and regulations, and you have to make sure it's okay for the data to be in the company. I was just reading the policy of one of my companies today, and they said all of our data must be stored in the US, which is a common restriction. So if you're using Microsoft Cloud or Amazon Cloud, you have to make sure you're using the version of that service that guarantees that your data will stay in the US, because the default cheapest version does not guarantee that. They use their servers all over the world, and you don't know where your data is. And if you do move to another location, then you've got a time zone problem and language and cultural differences in handling the staff there. So the first thing you have to do is inventory your stuff. I mentioned this before. The step one of securing your stuff is, well, what is your important stuff? And then, where is it? How many copies of it are there, and where are they? And you have to do this for your third-party vendors. Most companies, when they think about this, their business is already running, and they don't even know how many third parties are in use. I heard of a guy that said they would just look at the payroll and see how many dollars per month they're going to Amazon, and see how many books do you think they're actually buying. All the divisions of your company are paying for Amazon cloud servers, and you don't even know it. They've chosen to just put up servers for sales or something, and there isn't like an organization. So you can go with stakeholders to find these things. Accounts payable, like I say, might be a place where you can find these cloud services. This is called shadow IT, when people are running IT services without going through your official IT department, so you don't even know it's happening. Procurement is where you ought to go. You ought to go through a purchase process to purchase these things. And there's various places you can go to hunt for them. So ways to identify your third party. You can look for data connections. You can look for your firewall, IDS, and IPS rules. That'll show what third parties you're going to. If you have a cloud access security broker, that would be great. That's what you should have. That is software just to control how you access your cloud resources, and that there's permissions and limitations and logging of what people do there. That would be the best way to do it. And so there's a lot of applications you can install to manage your third-party Allgress and Optiv and RSA Archer. These are commercial products you have to control your access to third parties. And so you got risk tiering, where you try to figure out how risky these third parties are. This is a level of due diligence where you decide how much do we trust these guys, and therefore what should we really be asking them to do. And so things you'll consider is, are they going to handle sensitive customer data or internal data? How critical is it that this, to our business, what would happen if they just stopped working? How much would that hurt us? Do we have physical access to the building, or do others have access? And your contractual obligations. And so here's an example of third-party risk tiering. You might consider that if you are going to send your customer data up there, if you're sending 10 million records, that's a high risk, but if you're sending less than 10,000, that's a low risk, and so on with things like internal data and physical and system access. You can just decide your risk level for various ways you're going to use those services, and then compare the actual risk to your risk appetite. Let's try a Kahoot. Here they are, 4C1. Oh, they changed the music. like we got everybody that's coming. All right, so what third-party benefit is especially important for auditors? Objectivity is the main thing. When you are audited, you are usually forced to hire an external auditor who will not be part of your company and therefore have no conflict of interest. They are now able to tell the truth about you, even if it's embarrassing and wrong. A credit card shall be forced to pay for a QSO audit. And when I did financial work for the FTC, the external FTC auditor would come in every year to audit our stuff. You have to have somebody outside look at your audit, your books. The internal audit is useful, but primarily just to prepare for an external audit, which is the thing people trust. And this is what happened to Trump. His property values, which he's being in court about now, he had external people trying to assess these property values, and then he changed the numbers. All right, so what risk comes from outsourcing a department, and then it affects other departments? Morale is the issue. When you outsource one department, rumors will fly in your company that they're firing everybody, they're going to lay us off, they're going to outsource our department too. It is a common problem. All right. So which system will lower third-party risk? Cloud Access Security Broker. That's what it is. That helps limit what kind of cloud services are being used and by whom, and that lowers your third-party risk. All right, so which vendors should be subjected to thorough due diligence? Yeah, the ones handling sensitive data are the ones that require a greater degree of due diligence. You don't necessarily have to do it to all vendors. There may be vendors where there's no significant risk because the service they're providing does not represent a significant risk to your company. All right, what stakeholder often has third-party relationships that do not access IT systems? They had facilities. I was thinking procurement would be pretty good too, but facilities come up, and I think what we're thinking of here is there was a huge breach that came through the air conditioning. It was Target, I think. One of the biggest breach in the world at that time. They came in through the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. That vendor had, anyway, and they also send janitors into your building at night that can just go everywhere. And that's one common way for pen testers to get in, is to just pretend to be the janitors, or in fact get a job as the janitor, and then they can just get right into the stuff. All right, so Sean L. So, yeah, we're halfway through. All right. So if you want to assess what third parties are doing, one simple thing you can do is just give them a questionnaire where they're just supposed to tell you, do you encrypt your stuff? Do you check the background of your employees and things like that? If you don't want to believe what they say, you might request evidence like audit logs and such. You might visit the site. You might even want them to meet a third-party compliance standard where they're going to be audited from the outside with things like SOC 2 or 27001 compliance. That's another way to go, and this is typically how military does it. You must meet a certain standard to play in the game. They won't deal with you unless you meet that standard. So you can also go to business intelligence sites. There are services that collect information on the health of the company, and they will rate how much should you trust these guys, how many times have they had scandals, what do we think of their financial position, and stuff like that. And you can look at external cyber intelligence. There are people that scan companies. You can scan some companies, almost nobody will voluntarily agree to it, but there's dark web monitoring. This is something I was just talking about today on the Pulse Security podcast. The ransomware groups now post a web page and they announce who they've hacked. And especially if they announce who they hacked who didn't pay, and then they sell the data or post the data. And so there are services that scan that and you can see if they've been hacked. And that involves seeing if someone claims to have hacked them and if that appears to be plausible because the data looks good or that group has a history. And the latest thing that just came out on Twitter today is one of these ransomware groups hacked a company and then they turned them into the government. They told them they'd hacked them and demanded, I think, a ransom. And then 4 days went by and they were required to tell the government within 4 days. So the ransomware group that hacked them turned them into the government saying they didn't tell you we hacked them. So now they have out of compliance, even though it's a criminal reporting them. And what one of the guys on the podcast says is, I'm sure they shorted the stock. That's the way to be. They don't even need to get paid a ransom now. All you got to do is short the stock and then report you to the government. Your stock will fall and they make money. That amounts to the ransom, whether you pay or not. So anyway, all right, so you can do security scans and penetration tests. Somebody can. You might do them yourself on your vendors, but more likely you get them to give you a report. You can do intrusive monitoring. Third parties can view the internal control data, such as logs, if they allow that. That can be part of your contract. The problem is third-party vendors usually don't want to let you do that because those logs will include other people's data, and they don't have the right to do that. So you can have different kinds of assessment. You can have just a questionnaire. You might have confirmation site visits, external intelligence, security scan, and then you can decide whether, if you have the ability to do all this, whether it's still high risk or low risk, determining how much your assessment activities contribute to your trusting that vendor. And all right, and you can consider both the type of assessment and how often you do the assessment for these. And there are standards for all this. I know one of my clients does in fact have amazingly extensive rules for all these things. How often this test must be done, how often that test must be done. That's what you need. So then you have, if you have an issue, if they are doing something you don't like, now what can you do? So there's money and reputation. That's one way. You can say you're not going to pay. You can look at the reputation. You can consider, but suppose they really do something terrible. What can you do to them? If it's in a foreign country, you probably can't do much of anything. You probably can't really sue them. So it's an issue. This is why outsourcing to foreign companies is cheaper. It's also riskier. So you got a service level agreement that might promise a certain quality of service, might promise that they're using certain security policies, that they have considered how to survive disasters and check their employees' backgrounds, and that they understand who owns the intellectual property and who has roles and responsibilities. These are all the things that should be covered in your contract. The schedule at which they deliver things, obeying laws, how you're going to handle disputes, and how you're going to handle payment. Why, in the contracting business, there is typically a financial fine for being late, so much money per day specified here. So if you have something wrong, results from a questionnaire might not suit you, like they don't tell you, like they don't change the password. By the way, you're not supposed to have a password change requirement. The government required it for about 20 years, and about 3 years ago they said, that was stupid. But almost no company's got the memo. All the companies I deal with still force you to change your password every 30 or 60 days, even though this contributes nothing to security. I guess it'll be years before they get the memo. Anyway, but if you think you need to change the password and they're not changing the password, that'd be the sort of thing you might get mad about. And so you can either talk them into changing their policy, or you can let them try to convince you that they have some other compensating control, which means that whatever risk you were worried about is not such a big risk. And that certainly works for PCI compliance. Very often, when you meet a compliance standard, you often don't have exactly what you're supposed to have, but you argue that I have something that amounts to the same thing, because there's so many different networks and devices that there are many ways to achieve the same level of security. So to begin your relationship, you have upfront due diligence. You should consider what you're going to do, consider how risky it is, consider what you can learn about the company before you sign a legal agreement, make a educated decision about whether it is wise to trust this company or not. And so you got your contract language listing all these things, compliance and the right to audit, penetration tests, restrictions on further outsourcing. That got Kaiser. Kaiser hired a data entry service to type in medical data for patients about 15 years ago, and without telling Kaiser, that company outsourced it to Bangladesh at a much lower rate and then ripped those people off. So the people from Bangladesh came to Kaiser and said, you better pay me or I'm going to dump your data. And they're like, who is this person and why do they have our data? What's going on here? So that's an issue. So incident response is, of course, more complex. If you do get hacked, then you might not be able to get the logs, you might not be able to get response from those people, it'll be an issue. So then you have internal partnerships in your company. You deputize team members from other groups and security liaisons so you can work inside your company. Microsoft works. The teams at Microsoft act like contractors with service level agreements with other parts of Microsoft. They take it this way. They just treat internal partnerships like external partnerships. That's one way to go. So you got business risk, your legal issues, and you can have security clauses which help. It's best, of course, if your legal team gets involved before you sign a contract, obviously, making sure you have the right clauses in there. And human resources is a big one. 75% of resumes have lies on them because most people do not verify the resumes, and they don't do background checks, and they really should, because of course there are bad people who mess up things from company to company and just keep going there. So you shall have non-disclosure agreements and training, and there are human resource systems to help you do this. If you have internal transfers and you move to another department, HR is the thing that helps control your resources. Otherwise, something can happen. Like at this college, if you're a teacher, every time you go to a new classroom, they just give you more keys and they never take the old ones. So if you want to get in a door, you just find a really old teacher, and they will have a drawer with every key. That's called accumulation of privileges, and it's not the right way to do it. HR should know your job, and when you move from sales to management, they should take away your sales privileges and give you management privileges so you don't just get the sum of the two, so they know what's going on. And when you offboard, this is a huge issue. I had a guy that visited class to give a lecture, and he was responsible for searching people who were leaving the company to find how they were sneaking out proprietary company data, and he said he never failed to find it. They had a thumb drive or something. So when you offboard people, first thing you do is notify people and terminate their access rights. This used to be my job at my financial company. When they were firing somebody, they would have a long walk to the back room, and while they're walking back there, the boss would call me and have me terminate their access to the network. So before they knew they were fired, they couldn't get on the network anymore. That's what you have to do, because, once they're disloyal, you can't have them messing with your servers. And then you collect your assets, and they have non-disclosure and non-compete agreements, although, thank God, not in California. Non-compete agreements are not legal here, which is part of why Silicon Valley succeeds so well. You can totally jump ship and make a rival company doing the same thing. And the rest of the nation, they don't let you do that, so you're sort of trapped at your company. I see a question in the Twitch, I think. Is a company still responsible when a fraud is conducted by an employee from a third-party organization? Well, they might be. There will be a lawsuit and all that. If you give data to someone else and they sell that data, then there will be arguments. Who's at fault and how much they're at fault, sort of like a traffic accident. So I don't think there's a simple answer, but the simple answer is you probably are somewhat responsible. It's going to be a problem for you. Even if you're able to ultimately prove that it was really somebody else's mistake, you're going to have to pay all the legal bills and have the reputation damage and stuff. The question will come up, why did you give the data to this untrustworthy company and let them do a bad thing? Should you have known? If you can prove you had good reason to trust them and they betrayed you, then maybe you can argue it was really their fault. But if there were red flags and you should have known they were idiots, then it'll probably be determined to be your fault, but it's going to depend on who's got the more powerful lawyers in court and all that, you know. It's a very good question. There's no simple answer. So you got to train your people. You have to have investigations when bad things happen, like forensics and chain of custody and all that. And you have to have ways people are given discipline. Steve Jobs, when he ran Apple, was notably insane. He sued like a dozen of his own employees for leaking internal information from Apple. And the whole corporate world is like stunned. You don't have to sue your employees. You can just fire them. You can cut their pay. You can transfer them to Alaska or Timbuktu. You have plenty of ways to punish your employees. You'd have to be sort of nuts to sue your own employees. You've got power over them. But anyway, you should have things that can happen to you, like dismissal, time off without pay, and so on. Yeah.
Well, I already heard we crashed on Spotify.
Yeah.
And I watched it on Apple TV.
Yeah.
So how is it legal that a 16-year-old was in charge of security and IT? And
Well, I didn't know that.
So, and when it came for the board to reprimand Adam, when it comes to security of people's information, he blamed it on the kid.
Well, yeah, I've seen that done many times. The boss tries to blame the low-level worker, but the point is you're responsible for hiring somebody who's not competent. Now, they might have done something wrong, but the ultimate responsibility is the manager. Why did you take someone who was not really ready for the job and put them in?
Company used to do that, but then the smart one, the board, they usually kick those manager out.
Yeah. I've seen many times managers try to blame the low-level workers, but the problem is,
But the problem is,
Yeah.
you know,
the low-level workers
the
don't.
one that you're controlling, you're complaining about the controlling, the one that control, but then you're supposed to be responsible. So the normal company, they kick those managers out.
Yeah, well, you know, there was just a lawsuit filed recently to sue a chief security officer at a company that got hacked. And that is a new one, and people are terrified. The chief security officer might have to go to jail because he didn't secure a company well enough, and that's a new one.
How about Uber?
No, it wasn't Uber. It was another company. It came out in about a month ago, and it rocked the security company. If a chief security officer is criminally liable for not securing a company, then that's going to change the landscape of this. Typically, all you do is get fired. But if you actually can be punished in court.
Oh, I think it was the government saying that the security officers should be held responsible.
Well, yeah, and there is some point there's a crime called negligence, where you do something just awful that you should have seen. And that would be the issue, like you're saying. If you hire a 16-year-old to be your security team, there might be an employment law you're violating, and also there might just be the simple issue that they probably don't have the experience and certifications they should have. And so then that would seem to be negligence on the part of management.
No, but the thing is, a 16-year-old knows a lot more than the diploma.
Yes, that could be. It could well be. I mean, that's why, but this is the issue. If this is what happened at FTX. He just didn't run it well and had no control of where the money was going, did not have all the proper staff and controls, and therefore he was responsible for gross negligence when you do not do the bare, normal things that are required to keep your company going right. Boy, the heaters really make this place exciting with the noise. Anyway, who litigates if the company was outside U.S. system of litigation? Oh, well, usually if you cross national borders, then the only time there will be any punishment in the foreign country is if it's a really big problem, like a national security problem, critical infrastructure, or many millions of dollars or something. Usually any smaller crime, it's just too much bother to deal with. They do in fact punish ransomware games even in Russia and stuff, the really big ones that hit like critical national infrastructure, like Colonial Oil Pipeline, but only the largest crimes are punished across national borders, especially into hostile countries. So it gets complicated there. Anyway, so you got your facilities, your physical facilities. Consider, is there surveillance? How do they control who gets in? What about equipment, guests, security guards, and all this? There's physical safety there. And your information technology, you have the same issue. How do you control who gets at the servers? How are they attached? are their security tools like IDS and spam filters and firewalls. Something that just came up today, there was an article saying that they've analyzed the attacks from China and discovered that China has greatly increased their ability to discover and exploit 0 days in edge devices like firewalls and VPNs. And as I was just talking with right before they started, there's no defense against this. If somebody's going to take over your firewall, how would you ever know that had happened? All your monitoring devices are on the other side of your firewall, and they trust your firewall. So your edge devices, and that is what is being attacked now. And by the way, before China did it, the NSA did it. Shadow brokers dumped out the NSA attacks against those things. Taking over those edge devices is a pretty clever thing to do because there's usually no defense and no way to stop it. Anyway, let me take a look and see if there's more comments here. Right, okay, nothing new. All right, so then you got security monitoring. We'll have that class next semester, network security monitoring, and your system monitoring, so you can detect attacks. And as you're developing new products, this is my main contracting job, helping people include security in their original design. If you consider security when originally designing your product, it is cheap and easy to include security. If you wait until you test it and you find a flaw and then you have to send it back for rework, it will cost 10 times as much to fix. If you wait until it gets all the way to the end customer and now you have to have a recall and a patch and a vulnerability disclosure, it's going to cost 100 times as much to deal with that problem. Yeah, that's why, it's really good to learn to think about security right from the start. Code reviews are really important. You should run your applications through static and dynamic scanning to see what errors there are there, and do security review of it, and consider the open source libraries you're using. They have problems too. And training your developers, and as I just mentioned in the news, protecting the development process. Threat actors now attack your development, compiling, and deploying process to add malware to your code before it goes out. And that means you need to consider that all the stages of product development are protected. Procurement is, of course, also an issue. Whatever you buy, you should do due diligence to decide that you're actually buying software or hardware or other products that you can trust for the use you've got for them. And you got finance. One thing you can do if you are having trouble finding out what has been outsourced is you can go to accounts payable and find out what you're paying for. Like I said, one company just said how much money is going to Amazon. That's how I figure out how many Amazon Web Services are being used. If nothing else, that's one way to get a clue. And so your security manager needs to understand how departments function. So you don't just make stupid rules that aren't going to work. You are a consultant within your company to help the departments achieve their goals, and listen to them and say, what could I do to lower the risk without ruining your day? That's what you got to do. And half of all security breaches come from third parties, many of the famous ones. This is a problem, just natural. You sprawl your company to other companies, and they might be the weak spot. Somebody comes in. It often is. So the convenience and advantages of using third-party services comes with risks. And third-party risk management is a big, important issue. I see another question in chat. What percentage of companies outsource third-party security agencies? Well, I'd say essentially every company outsources functionality, like usually to Amazon Web Services or something. Now, outsourcing your security activities is also common. There are security brokers, managed security services, I think they call them. There are people who will, because you don't even have a security team, so you get somebody else to secure your stuff, often in the cloud. Doing it outside the U.S., I have not heard of anybody hiring a security team outside the U.S. to protect them. That would be kind of nuts. We are sort of world famous as having the best security teams here. Now, I've got other companies coming to me to get training and service from America. They generally say, we wish we could get our security up to the American level, and usually security is much worse in other countries. So I haven't heard of that. I don't know anybody that would hire a foreign vendor to secure you. It might be somebody, but that's a terrifying idea. I wouldn't do that. But there might be some business that chooses to do that. But yeah, crossing international borders, you usually don't make it a security activity. The most common thing, of course, is coding. You get foreign contractors to write your code, which then comes back here. That's commonly done. because you can hire outsourced coders out there. But all right, these are very good questions. So let's take the other Kahoot here, which is here. There's a name for outsourced security, I forget the term. Managed service provider, or something like that. Managed security service provider, I think. But I've never heard of a form yet. That would be pretty hard to justify. Might happen though, it's not like I know everything. I would think if your company is multinational, then of course you'll probably have security services in various countries. Okay, another new piece of music. Their music is upgraded. They must be making some money. I had to pay. They finally made you pay. This thing was free for like 5 years. So now they have some money, so I guess they hired musicians. I think there were 5 last time. I'll wait a bit, see if we get 5 this time. Man, this building has really noisy heat. It's steam heat. This stuff is heated like from 100 years ago. So I guess the pipes are expanding and contracting, so it makes all those cracks. Anyway, at least we have heat. We didn't have heat last year. This is better. All right, so a vendor is SOC 2 compliant. What kind of assessment is that? That's an external attestation. That means you meet a certain objective standard from the outside. That's what all these compliance standards are for, and it makes it much easier for companies. I just have to meet this compliance standard, then I know they're up to a certain level of security. All right, what provision requires you to verify the resumes? That's employee integrity. All right. All right, what internal partnership would prevent accumulation of privileges? It's HR that does this. They know what your job is and they know what job you left, so they can help make sure that you're not accumulating privileges you no longer should have. And which partnership implements security by design? This is product development. Like I say, that's a very common issue there. Considering security in the early stages of developing the product. All right, acronym. And roll in again. Good. Close down. And by the way, I don't think I mentioned it, but we won. Second place at the pen testing championship, defeating all these bigger, richer, more important colleges, and only being defeated by Stanford, which is not, it's not a disgrace to lose to Stanford. So congratulations. It's very good work of the team. And they may move to CCDC. And if anybody wants to be in the defense competition, you can sign up now. So do it quickly. We are going to do CCDC also. If you're interested, sign up there. All right, I'm going to stop the video and